Who's that I see walking in these woods? Why, it's Little Red Riding Hood. Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood. You sure are looking good. You're everything a big bad wolf could want. Listen to me, Little Red Riding Hood. I don't think little big girls should go walking in these spooky old woods alone. Oh.
What big eyes you have. Yeah, now there's an old song. Let's find the year on this one. This is the Coasters. Bet you it's 1966. I don't know if anybody knows, but no, you might know. I don't know. Anyway, I was thinking about wolves and endangered species and that kind of thing, because that's what chapter 18 is all about. So we are on page, God, I always have to look this up. I always forget what the page number is. 495. I think this is the only skipping around that we're going to do this year. Page 495, chapter 18. You know, we just talked about the evolution of biodiversity. So now we're going to talk about conserving the biodiversity that we have. Let's do it.
What a big heart I have, the better to love you with. Little Red Riding Hood, even bad wolves can be good. I'll try to keep.
Wow, I kind of like this. I have my iTunes opened up and I got music playing while I do these videos. That sounds pretty cool to me. Anyway, okay. We're on page 496 now, and it's chapter 18. And I'll tell you what, I just can't decide whether I can squeeze all of this into one longer video or two shorter ones. I should have asked you in class what you'd prefer. I'm willing to bet you'd prefer two shorter ones. And you know what? If I do two shorter ones, you can always watch them both in one day if you'd like. So I'll probably stop about halfway through this chapter. But let's go through the issues here when it comes to chapter 18. You've already seen this similar graphic from chapter 5. We are in the midst of our sixth mass extinction that we have recorded. And here are the stats for you. We've identified about 1 million species. Scientists believe that there's probably something more like 10 million. We just haven't even come close to identifying them all. And I think I mentioned to you in class, insects make up the greatest portion of these. Some 800,000 insect species that we know of. And again, scientists are estimating that we're losing about 50,000 species a year, being made completely extinct, and that's a short period of time in relationship to the other extinction periods that we've seen in our geological time scale. And here's the biggest reason why. Two major reasons. One is something called inbreeding depression. And you know, I've been talking to you plenty about what inbreeding is and why it's a problem. It's a problem because it decreases genetic diversity, and the chances of offspring getting two negative recessive genes from parents that are so closely related that each have that recessive trait brings problems to the ecosystem. You know, the cheetah, for example, is in very depressed state right now, and that is because there was a bottleneck. Remember the bottleneck theory that we had in chapter 5? A bottleneck probably, our estimates are happened about 10,000 years ago, and because of that, these species have inbred, and there is not a whole lot of genetic diversity. And, I've already told you about the Florida panther and the problems that it's having because it is unable to roam the way it's used to throughout its area. And so there's one small group in South Florida, that's about it. This inbreeding doesn't just cause birth defects and problems with the offspring in terms of deaths, but also heart defects, abnormal sperm, abnormal eggs. So these are all problems that are happening naturally with wild organisms. But we're also helping to cause a little bit mass extinctions ourselves because we're decreasing the genetic diversity of our plants, especially the ones that we're using for agriculture. So we're decreasing the genetic diversity in our agricultural plants and our livestock. We definitely breed our livestock for the best meat, the best yield possible. And because we do that, we end up with a very, very much smaller gene pool. Here are the terms of endangerment. I'm sure you've heard these before. Terms of endearment? No. Terms of endangerment. Of course, extinction. Now remember, there's more than one kind of extinct. I'm sure you've been taught that extinct means there's no more on planet Earth. But that's not necessarily the case. Certainly, for instance, if the manatees become extinct here in Florida, doesn't mean that they're extinct everywhere in the world. That's called local extinction. So there is such a thing as local extinction, where the species isn't gone off of the planet, but it is gone in an area where it belongs. And so we can treat a situation that way. Of course, we have our endangered species list. An endangered species is very near to being extinct, and a threatened species is very close to being endangered. We have lists for both of these. In fact, the Endangered Species Act, which I'll cover later, created these lists. Congress created the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to keep a list, to make the list and to keep it. And then, of course, we have these are under less concern. And here are some of the famous examples of endangered species. The spotted owl. And I won't tell the stories now, but you probably ought to know all of the stories of these creatures, especially you ACE kids, because you know how they're going to ask you in your essay using an example with which you are familiar. The gray wolf is a very famous story. Remind me to tell you that one if you don't know it. I know I've already told you the spotted owl story. Here's our Florida panther. I'm not sure what this thing is. But anyway, you need to know some of these famous stories of endangerment. Now, I think I've mentioned to you before that the manatee is doing quite well. The steps that we have taken to help the manatee population have worked. And their numbers are actually good enough to be downgraded from the endangered list to the threatened list. But they're not, because part of the plan for their endangerment was to keep them on the list an extra long time because they have such long gestation periods, etc. These pie graphs just give you an idea of the different types of organisms and how they're doing. We have birds are doing okay. They've got 79% are okay, but still we have a 12% endangered or threatened and a 9% nearly threatened. Mammals are a little bit worse. And I'd like you to come to class tomorrow and be prepared to, think about it tonight and be prepared to talk about why you think these percentages are what they are. Why are, birds, mammals, and amphibians so bad off? 12% threatened of all the bird populations is a big deal. 25% of the mammals? Wow, that's surprising to me. And then amphibians, but amphibians are by far the biggest. Why are amphibians so particularly vulnerable to being threatened? Well, you're going to find out in a minute, because we're going to discuss how organisms get in this situation. And here is an acronym for you to memorize. You can just remember this particular acronym, HIPCO, and what each of the letters stand for, and you'd be in good shape. Most of these things, remember, this sixth mass extinction that scientists believe that we're in is mostly human caused. So all of these are really human issues. However, the first one, the H, stands for habitat loss. The I stands for invasive species. And you can understand how humans are having an effect here, right? Habitat loss. Yes, we're developing more and more land over time, whether it's for financial reasons, economic reasons, or even it's for altruistic reasons. Like, you're a poor country and you got to feed your people. The fact is, we are causing habitat loss. And then we have invasive species. This usually happens, of course it can happen naturally, but invasive species end up in a new environment, mainly because we carry them there. I mean, think about Earth before we could fly, before we traversed continents. You know, an organism that belonged in Australia stayed in Australia, and now we introduce these different species around the world because we can. I don't need to tell you about pollution. Of course, we'll have chapter after chapter covering how pollution is a problem. Climate change, we have a whole chapter on that to go over, but once again, you can imagine that the warming of the surface of the earth has a particular problem for certain species that cannot adapt to them. And of course, the last one is over-harvesting. You know, the bison is a great example. What we did to the buffalo, the passenger pigeon. I mean, there are several examples of species that we overhunted almost to extinction. The passenger pigeon is extinct. Whales, we did a great job over-harvesting whales. So most all of these HIPCO causes are human related. So memorize this little acronym for you, and it'll help you remember the major causes of a decline in biodiversity, which is code for saying a decrease in species causing extinctions. It will take too much time for me to go through each one of these individually on this recording, so I'm going to stop it now, and we will pick up going through each individual letter in the acronym HIPCO. Late.